The impact of a controversial, transformative new California law that turns independent contractors into employees with benefits. Mission Valley, San Diego's most dense community, plans to add a city of 50,000 residents plus businesses. And Susan Davis is leaving her 53rd Congressional District seat, causing a stampede of would-be replacements. I'm Mark Sauer, and the KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer, and joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today, reporter Jennifer Van Grove, who covers growth and development for the San Diego Union Tribune, Chris Genowine, editor and publisher of the Times of San Diego, and Michael Smolens, columnist for the Union Tribune. Well, landmark legislation passed in Sacramento this week promises to transform our entrenched gig economy. It could mean pay guarantees and new job benefits for hundreds of thousands of California workers. It will also impact any number of businesses, large and small, employing workers now classified as independent contractors, that is, from Uber and Lyft to health and construction workers, truckers, janitors, strippers, manicurists, freelance journalists. The bill, AB 5, affects contractors not covered by laws guaranteeing minimum wage, overtime, leave, unemployment, and disability insurance, workers' compensation, and various workplace protections. And businesses enjoying independent contractors don't pay into Social Security or Medicare for such workers. All right, that's a mouthful, because this bill, Chris, is a mouthful. Start with, first of all, how controversial it is, and we're going to note that today you're kind of wearing two hats. You're a journalist covering this, and you also own a small business here, and we'll get to your opinion on that in a bit.
Right, it cuts very close to home in my case, and we'll probably talk about that later. But it's controversial, first of all, because it affects so many people. By some estimates, 2 million Californians are independent contractors, and many of them like being independent contractors. They're software developers and music producers. They don't feel exploited. They like this. Another element of the controversy is the seeming unfairness of which occupations are in and which are out. There are 40 occupations, that you mentioned some of them, that apparently because of political power were able to be excluded from this.
There's a lot of carve-outs there.
A lot of carve-outs.
So the basis for this law, what's the main argument of its author? And we should say that's Assemblywoman Lorena Gonzalez of San Diego, of course, a strong labor background here in San Diego.
Absolutely. Her background includes being a union organizer.
Unions were really back behind this bill, too.
Yes. Unions, this is the single most important legislative achievement possible this year for the union movement. Now, the reason we have Assembly Bill 5 is in 2018, the California Supreme Court ruled in a case involving Dynamics, a Los Angeles trucking company, that the contract truck drivers the company was using are actually employees. And in fact, what they ruled in this case was that if you are doing work that is substantially the same as what the company's business is all about, then you have to be an employee. You can't be an independent contractor. So if your business is journalism, then a reporter is an employee. If your business is trucking, then a driver is an employee. Okay. With that in place, there had to be some kind of bill to soften the edges.
And there's no opt-out. I mean, as we get into this bill, we assume the governor is going to support it. He has said he's supporting it, sign it, I should say. Workers, you're either in or out, but there's a bunch of carve-outs, as you say. And again, Gonzalez and other supporters of AB 5 say it's about fairness to workers, but yet it's controversial.
Well, it is. I mean, the idea behind the bill is very laudable, that there are workers in our society who don't have the protections that traditional labor law provides. Those protections, of course, disability insurance, unemployment insurance, training programs, lunch breaks, paid sick days, all those things. The issue, though, is that many independent contractors are fine with that. Take Uber and Lyft, the rideshare companies that were the targets. If you're a driver, whenever you want to, you open the app, you got a few hours, maybe you have a whole day, whatever it is, you start driving. When you're tired of driving, you stop. You don't have to punch a time clock. You don't have to work a specific shift. It's up to you. That flexibility, a lot like. Maybe there's some that would like to drive the whole day and work on a shift basis.
Or benefits and guaranteed
and all
wage
that.
and all
But others are using it just as a way to make a little bit of extra money. And the same is true for a lot of professional independent contractors like software developers, music producers. They make good money. They value their independence. They don't want to be on someone's payroll working a shift.
Now let's talk a little bit about businesses. A lot of businesses say the law will cost them heavily. You mentioned Uber and Lyft. They are among those who want to fight this, continuing on, even though it's going to become law apparently. The state themselves say they're estimating up to $7 billion annually they're losing in, I guess, payroll taxes and revenue coming through that way. So there's your real clash.
It's potentially a clash. I mean, another way to look at this, yes, businesses will be affected. I've heard numbers as high as 30%. My own business is probably closer to 10%. But the state is losing out on unemployment insurance, the taxes that pay for that, disability insurance, and training insurance. But, you know, independent contractors aren't eligible for those programs. So it's kind of a wash. Yeah, the state could bring in more money, but the state would have to pay out more money when people got laid off and so on. So I think that's kind of a wash from a budgetary point of view. It's more about fairness, union organizing.
And what about something like workers' compensation? A worker gets hurt who's in a gig job. What do they have? Private insurance, or they're out of luck? Huh?
Yeah, they're out of luck, or they have private insurance.
Okay.
And you know, in many cases, people have multiple jobs, so they might be an employee, but then be working on a gig on the side. Now, one of the biggest issues that's come up toward the end of this bill has been the carve-outs for specific occupations. And there's an element of unfairness perceived, certainly, to that. The Commerce Department defines nearly 1,000 different occupations in the United States. This bill carves out about 40. Now, it's clearly the ones that have political power, the ones you would expect: doctors, insurance agents, real estate agents, stockbrokers. They've got carve-outs. Also,
do hairstylists have a lot of cost? They've got a carve-out.
It
doesn't have to do with licensed professionals.
No. I mean, there are some bizarre carve-outs. Repo men, private investigators, electrologists. But clearly, the legislature did not go through all 1,000 occupations in the United States and carefully decide the merits of each one. This was all based on politics, and that creates an element of real perceived unfairness.
And continued friction. Jennifer?
What I thought was a little bit interesting, too, was even though Uber and Lyft appear to be the targets here, it sounds like, at least in the initial days after, that Uber has no intention of classifying their workers as employees.
Yeah, they're almost defiant.
They're a technology company, they say, not
right.
a transportation
They're
company.
completely defiant. They say that they do not believe their drivers are covered by this, and that they will challenge it in court. So you could see on day one hundreds of thousands of Uber drivers still driving as contractors, even while small businesses in California have to comply. Lyft, on the other hand, notably, has said, we're going to comply, and it'll cost about 300,000 jobs.
Now, let's talk a little bit about, personally, as a small business owner, there is some break was given to freelance journalists, right, up to, I think, 35 articles a year, right?
35 articles.
But you've got a staff of what, about 5? Explain, you
Sure.
laid that out in editorial, how it affects you as a small business owner.
I have, it's going to increase my costs about 10%. Now, that may not seem like much, but it's a small business. That's my profit. That's my livelihood. Right now, I have 5 contributing editors who work on contracts. They work at home, flexible hours, use their own equipment. I don't really supervise them. They post whenever they want. And they have other journalism customers as well. They like the arrangement. But what's going to happen to me? I'll have to cut back on the hours. Perhaps fortuitously, one of those editors just got a full-time job, actually at the Union Tribune, but I won't replace that position. Now, take those several hours I'm going to have to cut back, take that position I'm not going to fill, and multiply that by 100,000 or so small businesses in California, and there's a big economic impact out there.
And we're going to see that going forward here. Well, we expect the governor will sign the bill, but we're about out of time. But it looks like some legal challenges are going forward, a lot of clashes on how this might actually work out on the ground.
Yes, he indicated in a op-ed on Labor Day in the Sacramento Bee that he is going to sign it. But he also told the Wall Street Journal last week that he's still negotiating with Uber and Lyft. We could have an outcome where Lyft lays off people, Uber says, we're going to take you to court. A lot of California small businesses are affected by this and have to comply. You know, one of the big challenges with AB 5 is it's seeking to enshrine into law labor laws dating from the era of rotary telephones and vacuum tubes. And I think California really needs a 21st century employment law policy.
Well, it's interesting too. At the New York Times and all sorts of publications around the country have weighed in on this. It's as so many things in California. It starts here, may or may not be a model for the rest of the country, but people are watching it nationally. Well, we are going to move on. Be much more on that in the future, I'm sure. A city of 50,000 residents and 7 million square feet of commercial development will emerge in Mission Valley between now and 2050. That's according to the newly approved Community Development Plan for the community that is already San Diego's most densely populated. And so, Jennifer, start with this plan approved this week by the City Council. What does it foresee? What's it call for?
So the Mission Valley Community Plan update, which is now just the Mission Valley Community Plan, it creates a new framework for Mission Valley. So it's a 30-year land use and planning document.
And we should note every community has these plans.
Everyone
and groups
has
that lay
them.
out
They
for the
usually
future.
have a 30-year lifespan. They're supposed to be changed every so often. It just so happens that Mission Valley's old community plan was adopted in 1985. It was very car-centric. So city planners really felt like it was time to revisit Mission Valley. They started that process in 2015. Here we are today, and they really feel like Mission Valley can absorb 28,000 residential units, possibly 20,000 new workers, which will shift the population of Mission Valley to 2/3 workers, 1/3 residents today, to roughly 50-50 by 2050, which is the build-out year.
And that's mixed use, that's residential, as you say, residential units, as you say. All sorts of things are going in there now. And as we noted in the outset, it's already pretty crowded there.
It is crowded. There's a lot of traffic and some very key trafficy areas, Friars Road in particular. But what the city really wants to do is refocus Mission Valley along the river and to take advantage of that trolley line that they have there. And there's also an additional purple trolley line planned for the area. And there's an additional trolley stop that's planned as part of the future Riverwalk development, which would replace the golf course on the western side. But the idea is flip Mission Valley's model from commercial to residential and commercial, or mixed use in zoning speak. And then you will balance out the people there. And in theory, that should create for less traffic on the roadways.
And they want people on bicycles. They want more pedestrian-friendly areas.
So in focusing their attention on making the river the organizational spine, they would like to see what's called the San Diego River Pathway. They would like to see that completed from the ocean to the hills. The way that happens is developers have to come in and redevelop properties and then take on parts of the pathway as part of their project. But they've identified 17 miles of additional bike path in Mission Valley.
Chris, you're going to get on your bike and ride down Mission Valley?
Well, you know, it's one of the things that strikes me is whenever I go down there, I'm seeing more and more new development, like the big Savita Town Center that has things like bike paths and parks and whatnot. Would that be kind of a model for what the rest of it would look like?
Yes and no. The problem with Savita is it faces inward. And so what the city would like to see is they would like to see big projects like that connect to each other. And so what they've done is they're going to kind of basically rescind all the community plan ordinance and rezone all of Mission Valley. And in doing so, most of the zones will be this brand new mixed use zone. And that sounds like jargon, but it's not, because part of that zoning requires developments to build pedestrian paseos, not just through their own projects, but to connect to the other projects. And so in theory, you should want to go from Savita to the project next door, or from Riverwalk to, whatever happens across Fashion Valley.
Small town in the middle of the big city.
Absolutely.
Well,
Michael?
I think a lot of us have, we're familiar with Mission Valley, and, people say, you're going to put how many there because we're familiar with the traffic.
Right.
It wouldn't work that way, obviously. It's built on a sort of a different concept. But what I find interesting is that, we've all had stories about the slowdown in home construction. The number of permits is at a low. San Diego was the lowest in the first 6 months, San Diego County, of the entire state. Yet at City Hall, methodically, they're going through and doing what they've done in Mission Valley to various other communities. They just did the Sports Arena Midway District, where they have big plans for the future to really ramp up housing density there. The Grantville community, which most people don't know about, it's just north here of San Diego State, they're really welcoming it. A lot of people don't like the new development. They, that's sort of an aging industrial area, and they think they can become like the next Little Italy. So it's just interesting, in a way, while there's this building slowdown, San Diego's kind of laying the blueprint for
Memorial Day.
Well, sort of a building boom in the decades to come. Now, that doesn't guarantee
Nope.
more affordable housing. It doesn't mean that it's going to speed up development. There's a lot of issues there with fees and regulations that people will have to overcome. But it is kind of interesting that with all this hue and cry about not enough housing, that San Diego at least is laying the groundwork to really increase it a great deal.
Right. And Mission Valley, if you're a city planner, it appears to be the perfect location to put all this housing because it does have transit already. And so because of that connection, they really feel like this area can support that additional density.
And there's not a lot of opposition from existing homeowners, is there? Because you don't have single-family homes there.
So it's something like 99.5% is multifamily. There are owners of condos, owners of townhomes. However, it is a renters community, and I think that maybe some of the opposition would have come through from some of those people, and there have been some sticking points, right? So there's condos next to the Riverwalk golf course, which is in the process of being redeveloped, and they take some issues with that project. But that's on a project level, and I think some of the residents that did come out to City Council were like, we're willing to add housing at a time when people are saying, don't put it in my backyard. We're pretty special in that regard.
So before we leave this topic, I did want to briefly talk about the big dog here, which is redeveloping the big stadium site. Of course, San Diego State's in the midst of negotiating with the city and doing that. How's that going? Kind of give us a thumbnail update here.
I wish I could tell you how negotiations were going. Unfortunately, they're keeping things pretty close to the chest. I do think the fact that this SDSU West measure was passed in November, and we are now in September and we haven't seen an agreement, shows that there are probably some really difficult sticking points. But that's not stopping SDSU. So they've already released their draft environmental impact report, which if you look at a city agency, that sometimes takes up to 2 years to release. They did it in less than 6 months. And so that is out for now. A comment period, it's thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of information.
All that.
It is so much information. Thousands of pages on what the impacts could be of their development, and there's a lot, particularly traffic. But so
they got a builder too. They've got the fancy drawings of the football stadium.
They've hired contractors. Yeah. They have other projects out for bid. They're trying to hire a marketing expert. They are full steam ahead because what they want to do is they want to break ground early next year and get that stadium ready for 2022 football season.
Wow, another long talk for another day, maybe several days. And the demolition of the stadium alone is mind-boggling. But we'll get to that another time and move on. Well, after nearly 2 decades in Congress, Democrat Susan Davis is standing down, and that set up a scramble among aspirants for California's 53rd district seat in the House of Representatives. And here's what Susan Davis told me about why she's retiring from Congress.
My final decision, since I went back and forth, as you can imagine, a few times, had really more to do with my own clock and my own interests and the feeling of having accomplished, I think, a great deal in the Congress.
All right, long time there, but Michael, first to lay the scope of the land here, where is this district? And it's considered pretty darn safe for Democrats, isn't it?
It is. As we've talked about before we went on the air, Hillary Clinton won the district by 35 points. Now, that's against Donald Trump. I think a different Republican might have done better, but it is pretty safe ground, and the Democrats have a heavy voter registration advantage. But it goes basically from, I think, like the edge of Mission Hills all the way. It sort of straddles Interstate 8 and goes out to El Cajon and then swings down to Otay Mesa. So it covers a lot of ground like congressional districts do, but also a lot of different kinds of communities. But it is a very Democratic one. Part
of Mission Valley, which we were just talking about. And you noted in your column that the safe status will make fundraising difficult for Democrats.
Well, as I like to tell friends, I always reserve the right to be wrong. But it's going to be every election year is a big year. Next year is going to be huge. And there's such a fight for the control of the House. The Democrats want to hold on to it. The Republicans want to take over. The Democrats are pushing for a majority in the Senate.
And of course, then
there's the presidential race. Right. So in a district where there's almost, I don't want to say there's no guarantees, but very likely by a huge 90-odd% that's going to be a Democrat, will it be more difficult to raise money there? certainly people have their donors and stuff, but I think that weighs into the larger chessboard aspect, that this is not a swing district.
All right, and as we said, once Congresswoman Davis said, I'm not going again, I'm done with this seat, all of a sudden a bunch of folks came forward here. Tell us some of the bigger names that the people might recognize.
Well, I know, I lost count. I think, everybody, a lot of names get thrown against, well, right. I think you were mentioned. No, but like, 12, 15 names. But let's talk about who is in. It's Sarah Jacobs, the granddaughter of Irwin Jacobs, co-founder of Qualcomm.
Big supporter of the station, I should say, in transparency's sake.
And very wealthy. She's had money to spend on political causes, including her own before. Georgette Gomez, the city council president, she's in. She's going to have a formal announcement on Saturday, but she's created a committee, told her constituents. So those are really two of the big candidates. There were a couple lesser-known people already in. Jose Caballero, a Navy veteran who had run for a city office before, and he's, among the progressive Democrat core. And another fellow named Joaquin Vasquez, who was a low-level advisor in the Obama administration. And then the one Republican that's announced is, I have a list here, is Familia Ramos. She's a hospice nurse. She's also an anti-abortion activist. Is that a good fit for the district? Maybe, but it's going to be a tough road. We haven't seen a lot of name Republicans expressing consideration. Can't
tell the ball players without a scorecard, Chris.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think there may be more coming. There's Ray Lutz, who's floated the long-time environmental activist.
Just last night. We haven't checked here since we went on the air. Who knows?
One thing that struck me about Georgette Gomez's upcoming official announcement, she's in a very powerful position right now. City council president, chair of MTS, very soon to be heading for a higher office.
Well, there's been a lot of debate on that. Yeah. Georgette Gomez has actually, that's been very impressive in terms of rising to that. She, became council president after just 2 years on the council, and as you point out, the head of the Metropolitan Transit System Board. She's young, and she was actually up for re-election, was going to run for re-election, so you'd only think that her influence would grow, but there are city term limits, and you're limited to 2 terms. The attraction to Congress, in addition to dealing with a lot broader issues, with people feel they can do more there in some cases, basically if you're in a so-called safe district and you don't get into trouble and you're relatively popular, you can stay almost as long as you want. And that appeals to people because it takes a long time to get seniority in Congress. She's young, and who knows what her future would be. But really, there has been, among the politicos in town, a real debate, like, why would she leave this? But obviously, she has her sights set on that.
And you wrote that she might have advantages over Jacobs.
Well, they both have advantages. We talked about the fundraising difficulty that some may face. I'm not saying all, but certainly the lesser-known candidates. Sarah Jacobs has millions of dollars at her disposal. She spent millions of dollars of personal and family money when she ran for Congress in the 49th District, which Darrell Issa left and Mike Levin ultimately won. So she can jumpstart that. What I think that Gomez brings to the table, in addition, she'll be able to raise money, but she's really been a community organizer, community activist, and a lot of the party infrastructure, the Democratic clubs, are of like people. They're sort of the progressive wing of the party, perhaps even a little more liberal than the district at large. And those clubs have a lot of influence on the party endorsement. Does that mean she'll get it? Who knows? But she is probably a better known entity in that district because her council district overlaps with some of it. One of the things I had also mentioned that you don't know about Sarah Jacobs, she ran for that congressional seat up north. She was talked about to run for Scott Peters' seat in the more western 52nd District when Peters was almost certainly going to run for mayor, and he didn't. And now she's here. So will the seat shopping or district shopping rap hurt her at all? I don't know.
Right. I wanted to ask about another powerful name in Sacramento, Toni Atkins.
She said she's not going to run. I mean, Toni is, she's the Senate the president of the Senate, very influential position. One of the most influential people in the state, to be quite honest with you. I think that also that ultimately she faces term limits. Is there a statewide office in her future? I'm sure she's considering those options. So she clearly, perhaps unlike Georgette Gomez, which is a much lower thing, but a place of influence, she figures she's staying put right now there.
All right, and we're almost out of time, so I won't dive into the entire thing going on in the Duncan Hunter district out there. We'll save that for another time. But you did make the point, the complexion of the San Diego Congressional folks is going to change, changing.
It's been a very, they have partisan differences there, but when it comes to San Diego issues, and even earlier players, they really came together. And actually, I've seen them on stage together at certain events. They're very collegial. I'm not saying that's going to go away, but it takes time for new players to come in. And also, you have this matter of seniority. I mean, Susan Davis was on the House Armed Services Committee for almost 20 years. She was a second-ranking Democrat. That means something in terms of bringing home the bacon to San Diego, and we'll see where people end up and on what committees after this election.
So much to talk about, so many segments to come. Well, it's great. Good reporting on that. Well, that wraps up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, Jennifer Van Grove of the San Diego Union-Tribune, Chris Genowine of Times of San Diego, and Michael Smolens, also of the Union-Tribune. Now, an important programming note, next week KPBS is joining hundreds of news organizations from across the globe to bring home the urgent need to confront the realities of our warming planet. Our special coverage of San Diego's climate crisis begins on Monday on KPBS radio, television, and on kpbs.org. And we'll devote next week's roundtable to this vital topic. I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for joining us today. Be sure to join us next week. Thank you.